Welcome to Early Returns, hosted by Jan Barron, a partner of Holtzman Vogel. This podcast examines law and politics and seeks insights from political players in elections, lobbying, media, and the law. Now, let's join our host, Jan Barron.
Welcome back to Early Returns, a podcast about law and politics. I'm your host, Jan Barron. Our producer is Jody Mayer-Piazza. Today's episode marks the beginning of the second season of Early Returns. I've been privileged to interview interesting guests and welcome a large and growing audience of listeners. Our guests discussed laws about foreign election interference, what it's like to represent the president during the Mueller investigation. They've provided a perspective of a journalist who covers legal affairs, and we've talked to biographers and notable politicians and jurists, and also election lawyers who talked about the last election and all the legal work that they did. Our very first guest a year ago was the chair of the Federal Election Commission, who assumed his office in the midst of COVID. At the time, he had yet to meet any person of his agency, including his colleagues, all of whom were operating remotely. Well, the FEC is back in business and their offices have reopened. And to start our second season, I'm delighted to have as my guest the newly elected chair of the FEC. As we discussed last year, the FEC is a unique agency. It consists of 6 commissioners, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. It takes a vote of 4 commissioners to take any major official action. So some degree of bipartisanship is necessary. And each year, the commissioners elect among themselves a chair and a vice chair who serve in those posts for 1 year. The new chair of the FEC for 2023 is Democrat Dara Lindenbaum, who was nominated by President Biden last February and confirmed by the Senate the following May. Prior to serving on the FEC, Chair Lindenbaum was a partner in a Washington-based law firm and had practiced election law for over a decade. Dara has agreed to appear on Early Returns to talk about what's going on at the commission today and its agenda for the next election. Dara, welcome to Early Returns.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I always find it helpful to let my guests share a few thoughts and commentary about where they grew up and what brought them to D.C. or to being a lawyer, and in your case, an FEC commissioner. Why don't you share a little background information with our audience?
Sure. I grew up in New York on Long Island with parents who are on different sides of the aisle. So we were always, well, I would say relatively political active. Everyone had their views, but they weren't volunteering with campaigns. They didn't donate to campaigns because if one donated to one, the other would donate to the other. They'd cancel each other out, and they just felt it was better not to spend their money that way. But I'm very much engaged. I had no interest in being a lawyer whatsoever until 2004. And I was in college and I was volunteering on the Kerry campaign after spending some time fundraising for door-to-door fundraising for the DNC. And I saw the lawyers who would run into action when there was a problem happening at the polls. And I looked and said, well, it would be pretty cool to be one of those people. But I tried to put it out of my head. I think it's really important that you don't go to law school unless there is nothing else in the world that you want to do. So I tried my hand at nonprofits, but the pull just kept coming back. So I focused and I went to law school. And there are a lot of people now, at least, who really want to practice election law. I'm sure you see this too, people coming to you. Back then, people thought I was out of my mind when I started talking about election law and couldn't believe this was actually a real thing. And yes, it was post Bush v. Gore, but it wasn't as prominent, I think, as it is now. And there were very few jobs in this world.
Well, law school was here in Washington, was it not? I mean, where were you? At GW?
Yep. Yes, I went to GW. I had been in DC for a little while, kind of a spur of the moment. My friend Amy said, let's move somewhere together after college. And I said, how about Chicago? And she said, it's too cold. How about DC? And I said, all right, sounds good. So we just kind of wound up here by happenstance, and it all worked out from there. But I went to GW. I wanted to go there for a number of reasons. One of them was because I was excited to learn from Spencer Overton, who unfortunately wasn't there my first 2 years because he was at DOJ. But then I had the privilege of taking his class my third year. And being at school in DC gave me the opportunities to intern as well. And that really became the kickoff for my career.
And where did you intern?
So in my 2L year, I interned at the FEC. So I interned in Commissioner Bowerly's office. And because I was in DC and because of the way GW works, I was able to do the internship during the school year. So I wasn't competing with others for the summer internship. It was starting in January, and it happened to start the week before Citizens United was announced. So I was at the FEC the day the decision came down, reading the decision like everybody else, trying to pull it apart. And I got the bug. I loved it. I loved my time as an intern there. Working with Commissioner Bowerly for Commissioner Bowerly was fantastic. She had incredible EAs in her office that I learned so much from. And I love the energy of the commission.
And that took you then to a couple of other experiences, but mostly private practice with the Sandler Reef firm, and which is well known and respected in Washington. It does represent primarily political groups and activists on the Democratic and liberal side of the political spectrum. And you did that for about a decade, right? So you must have had some practice before the commission as well, right? So you saw the FEC from the outside before you went inside, even though you were an intern at Commissioner Bowerly's office for a little bit. And I want to get into how any of your perspectives may have changed over time. But when you were representing clients in cases and even before the Federal Election Commission, what were some of the things that you did? I mean, who were some of your clients? What were some of the matters that were important during that portion of your career?
I represented a number of different clients in front of the commission. Not many of them were really my primary clients. They were usually one-off kind of matters, I would say. And that is also the nature of the commission, the nature that complaints exist. People can file complaints with the commission fairly easily and use it as a sword or shield. And then the candidate or the committee has to defend themselves. So the work in front of the commission, we would file our responses and then sit and wait for a long time. I think that some of my work in the States actually also really colored my vision of this process and campaign finance and our roles here. The structure of the FEC, having the 3-3, makes it very much, there aren't witch hunts, right? There aren't political vendettas at the FEC. It takes a lot to enforce. And I think my perspective from practicing is that that's a good thing, because I have seen the political vendettas. I have seen state regulators go after people. I have seen campaigns that have had to go over and beyond what the law requires just to avoid an investigation. So that is something I bring to the work.
Well, there's a lot of criticism about the Federal Election Commission because of the way it is composed, so that there can't be partisan advantage one way or the other. And the results can lead to basically a lack of enforcement because there is not 4 commissioners voting to proceed in some fashion. That, of course, I think is the way the commission was intended to function. The Congress, when it created it, and I hate to say it, I was around at that time, the Congress was reacting to the Watergate scandal, and there was a lot of concern that unless you had some sort of even bipartisan approach, it could be susceptible to misuse and political use, so as opposed to even-handed legal enforcement. And if I understood you correctly, your experience with some state agencies where they don't have a balance like that has, in your observation, led to misuse for partisan or other personal type of objectives. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, now that you've been on the commission not quite a year, and you've had your perspective of dealing with the agency as a private practitioner and even an internship when you were still in law school, how would you describe your experience thus far on the inside as a powerful commissioner compared to your other roles vis-a-vis the FEC?
I would say it is a combination of exciting, frustrating, and inspiring. Government work is a very big change from private practice. So is having 5 colleagues who I have to have on the same page, or at least 3 other colleagues on the same page, but I would prefer to have all 5. And it's a big role and it's an exciting role. And I see this agency making great changes and moving forward. And that's a wonderful thing to be a part of.
And what big changes do you hope to make going forward?
Well, I think that as a baseline, we're trying to get things done. And we are, whether it is on advisory opinions and making sure that we can get some kind of answer on at least some part of the question to the respondents, or it is making programs stronger, or processes stronger, or it is asking the government for more money so that we can do our jobs better. Those are all kind of different aspects that I think are important.
How large is the commission's budget and how many staff does it have?
We have a little less than 300 people, and our budget for next year is $81 million. FEC has gone through years of either not requesting much more money or not getting the money that they request. And it is very important to me that we keep pushing for that money and making sure that Congress and the appropriators know that we exist and that it is critical that we have the money we need to perform our duties, like to maintain the database of campaign finance reports that come in. We are in a world of massive amounts of contributions due to online fundraising and companies like ActBlue and Win Red. And that takes a toll on our systems, and it is critical that we have the money to support them.
Does that suggest that the commission needs to update its data systems and the processing of campaign finance reports? What needs to be done specifically?
My understanding, as not a tech person, is it takes quite a bit of money to keep those systems up to date and to make sure that they can withstand the load of uploads. Everybody uploads all their data on the same day, sometimes at the same hour. And it is really important that people be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And that when the public and reporters and others go to look at that data, that it exists in a way that they can view it easily.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, all of that information and data is accessible online through the FEC's website, fec.gov. Is that correct? And at your agency, the Election Commission, even though it has the word election in it, you don't really run all the elections, the voting and counting. Your focus is on campaign finance. You're tracking all of the money that's being raised and spent in elections for federal office, and it's limited to those offices, which is the House, the Senate, and President. So all the other elections that go on in the country with respect to the money that's raised there, they're handled by the state agencies, and the actual voting is handled by each election administration and in each jurisdiction. So you're a small part of our entire, but a very important part of our entire election process when it comes to having information in a reliable system, and most importantly, to have effective disclosure of the money in politics when it comes to our federal elections. Well, as a chair of the FEC, you have the power. You don't have a whole lot of power. I mean, you still got to have at least 3 of your colleagues to do something that requires an agency action. But it's only the chair that has the power to set the agenda and schedule the meetings. Of course, you want to do that collaboratively, make sure people are in town and things like that. What do you see as your agenda as chair of the Federal Election Commission?
Well, what I hope for this year is to keep things moving and to use this time to make our procedures and processes better and really shore things up. I think my colleagues have done a fantastic job in the last 2 years of clearing the agency's enforcement backlog. When Commissioner Broussard took over as chair, when she was confirmed, her office took on a tremendous workload and really pushed everybody to get through this perfect backlog that existed. And then Commissioner Dickerson, when he took over as chair, continued that push. So because of that, we can now focus on these large structural issues. For example, we just announced a public comment period for the FEC's audit process, which is a very important issue that is quite weedy in our area, but many in the public don't even know that we do. But we audit a number of different committees every year, and the process has become incredibly unwieldy. So after years of hand-wringing in the agency, outside the agency, we are going to take on amending the process. So we have that time, and we just put out a notice. It's on the FEC's website requesting that everybody involved in the process submit comments on what their experience has been and any ideas they may have to make the process better. I hope you and your colleagues will comment and others, but that's one small thing we're doing so far.
Yeah, well, what's the current process and what is it that makes it potentially unwieldy?
So the process has many different components of it that end up being incredibly inefficient. It goes back and the audit office basically sends reports back and forth to the commissioners, and the opportunity for the committee that's being audited, there aren't as many opportunities for the committee that's being audited to really be able to question the legal analysis. So what we're hoping to do is to really streamline that process so that, first of all, the efficiency side from the commission, the auditors are not writing as many reports and sending them back and forth up to the commission, but also making sure that the committees have a real opportunity to question and respond to the legal analysis and to move this process along quickly so that a committee can really move on into the next cycle after getting through the audit.
How many audits a year on average does the commission conduct?
It's been around 15 a year for the last 10-ish years. The commission has completed over 1,000 audits since the 1976 election, but it's about 15 committees per cycle.
And what does a committee have to do to be so unlucky as to get audited?
There are a lot of determining factors that are looked at, but it's really review of disclosure reports, and the reports analysis division has different structures to find committees eligible. And there are a number of other factors that are really looked at there, a number of which are on our website and that will be clarified through this process as well. And it's often state parties that are audited.
State political parties?
That's right.
So if I hear this correctly, the entities that are customarily audited will be committees that file reports with the Federal Election Commission, and that those reports may reveal some anomalies or discrepancies that are chronic and might trigger an audit. Is that a fair summary? Okay, now, does the commission audit organizations that are not registered committees or contributors to candidates and committees?
No, the commission only audits registered committees, and that is the extent of it.
And the commission's universe of entities that it audits has somewhat been reduced because originally, you mentioned 1976 when the commission conducted its first audits. The first audits were mandatory audits of all campaigns that got public money to finance their presidential campaign. And if you had such a campaign committee, then you would have to have an audit. But of course, we really haven't had publicly financed campaigns by and large since, I guess the 2004 election was perhaps the last one, or maybe even 2008 with John McCain, as I recall. So that means that there's just a little less for the auditors to do, doesn't it?
And those audits for those campaigns that took public funds were also, they're a little bit different, I think, than the ones that are done here, especially because the process to qualify for matching funds. But yes, it has changed the group that is done here.
Well, it's hard to believe, but the next presidential campaigns are around the corner. I mean, candidates have already started to announce. President Trump has, he's running for re-election. We expect President Biden to perhaps do the same thing in the short order. And is there anything new that the commission is planning or will plan to do with these upcoming presidential elections? Is there anything different, or are you just going to hunker down and wait for the reports to come in?
I think I'm hoping to use this year to really prepare for it. During the off year, or the odd years, I should say, is the time when we are really handling a lot of the enforcement matters that had come in during the election cycle, but also looking at what we did well and what we didn't do well, and making sure our staff is up to speed. We're doing a round of hiring. I hope everyone will keep their eyes out for all of the job announcements that have been coming out. I'm particularly focused on recruitment for these jobs. These are really great jobs, and we want really great people to fill them. But all the housekeeping items can happen during this year. Things like shoring up the audit process and making sure some of the other processes that I've noticed being new to the agency, that things that may not make sense, things that might not be clear, making sure that we have those in writing so that we are always following the same procedures, or complaints that we repeatedly have within the agency, making sure that we have the time. Let's handle those. They may be minor, but they may make us more efficient. So those kinds of things we can do now to get ready for 2024. And I also hope that the regulated community will use this time to send us advisory opinions and to interact with us. We dealt with a lot of advisory opinions during the last cycle, and I think the advisory opinion process is a really great way for us to work with the community to stay up to date on what's happening with campaigns. So hopefully that will happen again this year.
And of course, that process, whether it's advisory opinions or enforcement actions, requires that vote of 4 commissioners to do anything. And you've already said that you hope you can make any decision unanimous, which is increasingly admirable in Washington these days, when the House of Representatives doesn't seem to be able to do anything unanimously, including adjourning for the day. What goes on at the commissioner level? How do you keep things collegial in doing your jobs and trying to move ahead? Because obviously there are differences of opinion, strongly held views. One of the things we haven't mentioned thus far in our conversation is that there was a period of almost 4 years, I think, where there wasn't even a full complement of commissioners. And there were periods of time where there weren't even 4 commissioners on the commission. And the 3 that were there couldn't agree on some things, right? So what do you guys do, to try and stay friendly and keep moving along?
The agency has a history of having some problems amongst the commissioners. And while it's something kind of I know about, of course, it is something that I try not to make part of anything I do, and to try to move on from it and come with a fresh slate. So I can tell you that what I try to do here, and that's to try to find common ground while avoiding unnecessary triggers. So I came in with really a baseline expectation that I could take people at their word and that I would be honest, flexible, and transparent. When I am making a choice, I let everyone know what that choice is. I don't just, squirrel it away. I will go overboard on explaining. For example, when a reporter had twisted something I had said, I forwarded the exchange to my colleagues and said, this is what happened. I'm trying to get him to correct it. And I didn't have to do that. And people were surprised I did, but I wanted to make it very clear that this is where I am on this. We also talk a lot across the aisle. I not only allow, but I encourage my colleagues to try to change my mind or to give me a perspective from the beginning. Everybody has a different experience coming in. It's what makes this cohort, I think, quite strong. And I can pick up the phone and say, this is what I'm thinking on this, but what do you think on it? And let's talk it through. We aren't horse trading or negotiating. We are simply seeing if we can get to the same place. And there have already been a number of matters that would have deadlocked had we not picked up the phone and talked about it and realized we actually are in the exact same place. There's just one word that we need to change. Something so minor that doesn't affect the substance, but that will give the regulated community a real understanding of where we are. It really is remarkable how similar our perspectives are. I also think having young kids is a pretty good bridge. When you start your day with your 3-year-old reprimanding you for not adequately cleaning up the night before, or the other one talking about her imaginary new mommy, it's really quite humbling. And when you see somebody else kind of dragging in the morning, you have a pretty good idea that they experienced something similar. So the other thing is really just avoiding triggers. If I wanted to, I could certainly hit everybody's pressure points. I could make every hypothetical about guns, God, and, whatever. But that isn't going to get us anywhere. So instead, we focus on the subject matter. So if an AO an advisory opinion involves, a pro-choice group, I can bring down the temperature by imagining it's a group of Pearl Jam fans or something similar to help us operate without those triggers.
And are the commissioners seeing each other in person again? I mean, are you all back at the office? So you kind of get together beyond the regular weekly meetings or whatever that are scheduled? I know you can't do it without violating sunshine laws and things like that en masse, but do you visit commissioners in their offices back and forth and talk these things out?
Certainly. I will say that Commissioner Dickerson has the best supplied office when it comes to coffee and other needs. I have certainly gone in there to get some creamer for my coffee. But we do go back and forth and look at each other's tchotchkes and, try to have that kind of relationship there. We all alternate between working remotely or being there. We have a really great hybrid system thanks to the staff that set this up. To me, it's important to be able to work from home often. It helps me be part of my kids' lives, but also I like going in and talking to everybody and being there. So I think we're working on a good balance, and that works for us.
Now, are the commission meetings, the formal meetings, are they all in person? I mean, are the commissioners all in person?
We have a hybrid structure that is working well. So there are some commissioners that go in all the time and really like to be in the office. There are others that do many of them remotely, and it can all work together.
Well, I know that your predecessor, who you succeeded as commissioner, resided in Nevada. So you almost always participated remotely. And of course, during the extended COVID period, everything was remote. So the reason I'm asking you all these questions is I want to sense the extent to which you all are physically seeing each other and whether that's contributing to perhaps a more productive dynamic among the commissioners. But I don't want to press you any further than to say that you all are a hybrid, but you see each other more than the commissioners did a year or two before.
Yes. And I'm not sure if it necessarily contributes to us getting along better, because certainly, years ago, the commissioners saw each other every day and they didn't get along. So I think it really depends on the effort that we're putting in there and the importance of going in with that in mind, that we're going to really work together here.
Well, outside of the commission, the campaign finance laws regularly targets of legislation in Congress. I know there was a major election-related bill that was introduced in the last Congress, part of which dealt with campaign finance, that was not adopted in any fashion. Do you see some legislation popping up again in this Congress that might affect the Federal Election Commission and campaign finance? And if so, do you give it much of a chance of passing and changing what's going on?
Well, I hope so. Every year, the FEC submits unanimous legislative proposals to Congress. So we submitted ours at the end of the year. There were 15 legislative proposals, which I think is more than have been done in the past. And they really run the gambit of everything from, administrative and salary related issues for staff at the agency, to scam packs, to everything else.
Tell our listeners what a scam pack is.
Well, that's part of the problem, is defining what a scam pack is. It is very easy to form a political committee, and there have been political committees that have been formed but don't actually do any political work, and instead are raising money, and that money appears to be going into the pockets of those who have formed the PAC and not following through on promises they make to donors. That is one interpretation, I think, of a scam PAC. But that's part of the issue, is to ask Congress to define it.
Well, the Department of Justice, which has jurisdiction over criminal enforcement of election laws and general criminal enforcement, has gone after some organizers of political committees under basic criminal statutes that make it illegal to conduct fraud, right? So you can register a committee at the Federal Election Commission, you can go out and start raising money, but if you're raising money under representations that you're going to do something with the money and you don't do it, that's your standard issue fraud. Department of Justice have any input on your recommendation on scam packs, or any thoughts on how you can make their life easier if the law was changed?
I think a definition would help. To my knowledge, the Department of Justice did not have any input on our recommendations, but the Department of Justice does have a very big role in campaign finance regulation. At the FEC, we only deal with civil enforcement. The Department of Justice deals with the criminal enforcement of campaign finance. So knowing and willful violations is what they investigate. And as you said, the fraud aspect of it, the honest services aspect of it, some of the complaints that we may get in really are within the realm of the Department of Justice, and ones that should be adjudicated there. But certainly we see what they're doing there. And really that's picked up. That kind of enforcement of solicitations is relatively recent.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, we have a very dramatic example of criminal enforcement of the campaign finance laws with the recent indictments and charges against FTX, the cryptocurrency company, and its founder and senior executives. Part of the charges, beyond allegations of fraud in the selling and promotion of cryptocurrencies, is an allegation that many of the contributions that were made by FTX and its executives were illegal, were crimes when they made the donations to political organizations. I know you can't comment on that because it's something that's pending, and it might even be pending in the civil way at the Federal Election Commission. But I just wanted to point out for our listeners that that's a pretty big deal, that you have a big crime and controversy completely seemingly detached from campaign finance, and yet it becomes part of that important case. Well, are there any other major cases that we ought to be monitoring that are on the FEC radar? I mean, are there court cases pending that you may or may not be involved in that you think might be resolved this year?
Well, I think the biggest case that's happening right now is one that your firm has brought. It's the NRSC, or the National Republican Senatorial Committee. I think I got that one right. Case that is challenging the coordinated party expenditure limits. And the case is out of Ohio. And it will be interesting to see how that case goes. I'm very interested in seeing how it goes.
Okay. Well, just for the record, I'm aware of that case. I personally am not involved in that case, but several of my partners are. But I historically have been very much involved in the issue, which is whether or not it's constitutional to limit the amount of money that can be spent by a political party on behalf of its own candidates. Represented the Colorado Republican Party in two cases before the Supreme Court of the United States, one of which I won, that established the right of parties to engage in unlimited independent expenditures. But the second case, the court concluded 5-4 that it was not a violation of the First Amendment for Congress to establish a limit on how much could be spent or contributed by a political party to its own candidates. So that is an issue that's been around now for almost 50 years, and it's been litigated and relitigated, and we'll see what happens this time around. Thank you for that suggestion. Well, I think you've pretty much covered what's going on at the commission right now and your wish list at Congress and what is going to be on the radar going forward, including this rulemaking notice on the audit process. I appreciate all of that information and insight. And as we wrap up our conversation here, as I do with all my guests, I always welcome a reading recommendation. You know, are there any books that, whether it involves politics or law or whatever, that you think our audience ought to take a look at and see if it might be of interest to them?
Sure. Well, I am a big reader, pleasure reader. I like to read fairly light books, especially right now, something to take my mind off of it. So for anybody that wants a really fun book, the number one book I recommend is a book called Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. It is basically a rock star comes and lives with your neighbor's book. It is as good as it gets and as fun as it gets. So I recommend that. And then I don't really read campaign finance related books. I did starting out. I always read the books for my former bosses, but something that comes in my, former life is a book called Our Time Is Now by Stacey Abrams. And I think that there are a number of misconceptions about what happened during and after the 2018 election. And that book really explains kind of what we went through and the actual process. So it's not to advocate one side or the other. It is just to give the perspective that we had going into it. And I really encourage everybody to read it to understand what happened at that point in time. It's kind of amazing how long ago that was now. But I think it's still helpful.
Well, and we didn't mention this up to this point, but I think it's important to note that Stacey Abrams is someone you represented when you were in private practice, and you were a lawyer for, I gather, one of her or more of her organizations and campaigns. And so you would be familiar with the legal and political issues that arose in 2018. And of course, she ran again for governor just this past year and lost to incumbent Governor Kemp. But obviously, she started a big movement that focused attention on election laws and their fairness and how they operate. So thank you for that recommendation. Thank you for the Mary Jane recommendation. Sounds like something that would be more pleasant reading and a distraction from everyday life. So our listeners have a choice here. Two very different book recommendations. Dara, thank you very much. Appreciate you being a guest on Early Returns. We are going to conclude this episode. My thanks to Jody Mayer Piazza for producing another fine show. And we look forward to having our listeners back for the next episode in approximately 1 month. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining Early Returns, Law and Politics with Jan Barron. We hope you will join us for future episodes, which will continue to bring you voices and insights from the people engaged in our political landscape.